So we've talked about variables and data types. I want to talk a little bit about functions and what I mean when I say function. So a function is like print. And I will add a link in Python or in our class on Canvas to a function reference that has a lot of our basic functions that we'll be using in this class in pages like this. And this is a common format. If you Google Python print function, you will come up with a web page that looks a lot like this. It often has these same elements. So I want to teach you now how to read a page like this so that you can use any function that you can look up in Python. Why do I want you to learn that? Because for the rest of your programming life, you will be looking up functions. I looked up a function yesterday, and I've been doing Python programming for decades. But here's the deal. Our brains, in spite of everything you've learned your entire education, are not containers for data. Our brains are thinking machines. Trying to store a bunch of data in there just clouds your ability to think. You only got a certain amount of space. In fact, one researcher described our brains as like a small table. You can put stuff on the small table and you can add as much as you want there. But eventually you're going to add so much crap on the small table that you're going to be pushing other stuff off. So here's what I suggest. This isn't a memorize it kind of class. This is a have an idea of what's possible kind of class and learn how to look it up. And if you focus on that in your programming, you've got an internet connected supercomputer in your pocket, aka your phone, that you can look up stuff anytime you want. So don't memorize every bit of every function. Now, some of the functions you're going to use so much that you will memorize them and their outputs and inputs and things like that. But other times, you're just going to look at a page like this and you say, oh, yeah, that's right. That's how you use it. So the print function, here's a description of it. Basically says what it does. The syntax is an example of how you should use it in code. And so it tells you how you would use this print. Now, right now, we're just using print with one parameter or argument, what it is we want to print. So we're printing hello world or whatever. So here's an example of how it might be used. And then this here is sort of the keys to the kingdom in terms of how you can make print do other stuff. So it tells you what's required. A required parameter means you have to give it at least that. You have to give it something to print. But then it has other parameters, separator, an end, and a file. We're not going to worry about those right now because we're just going to use print in a more basic way. So we're just using the required argument there called object. Now, something you need to understand about functions so that you won't be confused when you're using them later is this. Some functions do something, like print is a classic example of a do something function. I type print hello world and it does something. It prints hello world to the screen. Okay? Some other functions return something. In other words, they do something silently and they send it back. Who do they send it back to? Python. The output of that function gets sent back to Python, and Python says one of two things. It either uses that value that's sent back, or it saves it in a container, aka a variable, and if you don't use it or store it, it just goes away. So you got to capture that in that return from the function, and so we're going to introduce your second function. Let's start with some new code here. And I want to show you a function called input. And input is a function that allows you to ask the user of your program to type something, and then it returns it to Python. So first thing I want to type here is input. And input takes a string as an argument, only one required argument, and I'm going to say this, input, and it's going to say type your name. Why does it say that? Because input's one argument is called the prompt. Input's prompt is what it does to tell the user what to do. You can think of a prompt as like instructions for the user of your program. So if you have a program where you're recording somebody's name in a database and you want them to type their name, you're going to use input and type your name. And so when I run that, what you can see down here is that it says type your name and it's got a little blinking cursor now after it. So the prompt is what the computer will ask me when I run it. And then I can type my name and I hit enter. And what happened there? I typed my name and then the program just ended. What a disappointment, right? It didn't even do anything. What happened? I typed my name and it returned my name back to Python, but I didn't tell Python to do anything with that name. So it just goes away and the program ends. So if I want to use that name, I'm going to have to do a little bit more work. So the thing I want to do with the results of that input is I want to capture them in a variable. So my variable is going to be somebody's name. So what should I name my variable? String name? Yeah, so str, capital N, name, just like that. That's good. Doesn't have to be that, but that will make sense later in my program. Now, let's talk about what the program does right now. Because when I run this, it's not going to do anything different than what it did before. So I'm going to run this, or it's not going to appear to do anything different. If I type Bill and I run that, it just ends. Again, huge disappointment, boring program. I type my name, all that work for nothing, right? Why? Because all it's doing there, if you look at that line of code, is it's asking the person for a name. It waits, they type it in, and then it takes that name and puts it into a container called strname, and then it just ends because it doesn't do anything. So let's add a line of code, and I'm going to show you something neat that you can do with print. And that neat thing that you can do with print is you can print out multiple things in one line. And I'm going to type the word hi in quotes like this. And then I'm going to put a comma. And then I'm going to type my variable name. And then I'm going to type another comma, and I'm going to start another string. And I'm going to say, nice to meet you. Now, this is giving multiple arguments to the print function. And it will print each one of those things on one single line. So let's run this. And I'm going to type my name. And then you can see it takes that name that I typed and puts it right in that spot. Interesting thing that I want you to pay attention to. On line 2 of my program, when I do that print statement, I want you to notice that there are no spaces in any of those strings, right? No spaces. But when it prints it out, it adds a space here and here. That is because the default separator in the print statement is a space. So everywhere there's a comma in between things, it's going to put a little space in there. By specifying a different separator, I can get rid of that, but I don't need to right now. Okay, so if I run this again and I type the word William as my name, you can see it magically puts William in there. So this is how we interact with users. Now remember that this string that I'm putting inside input right here, that is not what goes into the variable. That is the prompt. That is what I'm asking the user for. Okay, that's what I'm asking the user for. And then whatever they type is what that input returns back to Python. So a lot of people will make this mistake. And they will want to say str name equals input Bill. Because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to have it put Bill in as the name. But when you run that, it's confusing for the user because that's what they're going to get. That's not very user-friendly, right? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, am I supposed to say yes? And then it gives me something illogical. So remember, this is not the value you want in the variable. That is actually now here's an interesting thing. Remember when I said that a function that returns something, I either have to put it in a variable or do something else with it, right? I can use it right away. If I don't want to save that value, str name, here's an interesting little trick that I can do. Now in this case, I have a print function with an input function inside of it as its argument. Why can I do that? Why? Because input is going to return a string, whatever the user types, and then print is going to use that and print it right out. So if I do this, if I run this program, you can see it says, what is your name? And I type Bill, and then it prints whatever I type. So I can immediately use that, and that this is called function stacking or function nesting, okay? That means we're putting a function inside of a function. And this is a great shortcut that you can use all the time throughout your programming career. It makes it a little more difficult to read, I think, but it saves you a lot of typing. So it's once again one of those like tricks that facilitates our laziness as programmers. So I'm going to introduce a few more functions that I want you to see, and I'm going to use that same form. The type function. The type function will tell you what data type is inside a variable. So if I print a variable, it'll tell me what's in the container. If I want to know what type of thing is in the container, whether it's a string or a Boolean or a float or an integer, then I use type. And type is a return something type function. So when I use type, okay, so if I say str name equals Bill, like this, so I'm setting a string variable named str name, and I'm putting the string Bill in it. If I say type str name, like this, and I run that, it's not going to do anything because type is a return type function. So it returns something, meaning I have to grab it into a variable or print it out. So if I want it to print the type of variable that string name is, I can nest it just like this. and then it will print, okay? Class means it's a data object in Python, but you can see here, it'll tell me it's a string. Now, it's based on what's actually in that. So if I happen to say something like str name equals 42, my variable name isn't very accurate because it's neither a name nor is it a string. But when I run this code, it will tell me what's actually in there. So just because you name a variable something doesn't mean that restricts what's in there in any way. It's just a note to yourself. What's actually in there is dependent on what's actually in the box, what's actually in the container. And in this case, it's an integer. So I can use type, the type function, to peek inside a variable and say what type of data is in that box, in that container. So type, very useful. Another function we just talked about, but I'll review it anyway, is input. Input causes your program to pause and wait for user input. It will not do anything else. It will not go past that line until the user types something and hits enter. Now you can use input to have your program pause and wait for the user to do something. Like if you have a paragraph of text that you want them to read, you've probably seen this. In fact, on some computer programs, it'll just say press enter to continue. You can have input do that for you. Press enter to continue, and then don't do anything with whatever they type. Just throw it away. And then that will cause the computer to pause and wait for them to do something. So input is very useful for a lot of interactive functions.